and welcome everyone to another Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. My name is Nina Joshi, and I am very excited to bring on our guest today, Zina Manji, who is the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Innovation at GSK. Before we jump in, just wanted to let you know that we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask Zina. So with that, I would like to formally bring on our guest, Zina. Hi, Zina. Thanks so much for being here today.
Yes. Hi, Nina. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump into it. So to kind of kick things off, would love if you can tell us and our audience a little bit more about yourself and what you do in your current role.
Yeah, happy to. So I really am focusing on regulatory and innovation and solutions that empower individuals to live well. It's kind of how I would summarize.
Love it.
And so I'm currently Senior Director, Regulatory Affairs. As you mentioned, I lead innovation in the Consumer Healthcare division of GlaxoSmithKline.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually been at GSK through several mergers and acquisitions and ventures. It's been, this month will be 22 years.
Congrats.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It continues to be amazing. So I actually came to what was then SmithKline Beecham right out of grad school. So my background is pharmacy,
Mm-hmm.
and I got a PharmD and master's in clinical pharmacy, and actually came to SmithKline Beecham during an industry rotation as part of my PharmD degree. And I discovered regulatory affairs, which was really quite interesting because it synergized my interest in law, in medicine, in diplomacy.
Right.
And I thought, okay, this is something interesting. I might like it. And 22 years later, I'm still here. So really, what I love about Reg Affairs, it's really about telling the story about your product, right? How you frame that with regulators, how you go through the negotiation process in terms of bringing product to market. But even before that, how you develop the product and actually make sure you're getting the right points to bring forward to the regulatory authority. So I also have global reg affairs experience. So you can imagine trying to frame the data package on a global level where you're not going to do ideally multiple clinical studies. Some cases you do because it's a local requirement to study locally.
Right.
But it's really quite amazing. So through the years, I've worked on several therapeutic areas like pain management, respiratory, oral health, skin health, smoking cessation. So you can see within that, there's a lot of aspects of, behavior change. And, what really is the unmet need that the consumer is trying to meet on a day-to-day basis. And now you hear so much more about this kind of patient engagement, consumer engagement. So it's absolutely exciting time to be in consumer healthcare because I think it's really redefining what healthcare is. It's really about the patient, about the consumer on kind of that day-to-day experiential aspect. And so I also completed Columbia Business Program that's part of executive education, the certificate in business excellence. So I focused on digital health, and we can talk about that more later on as well. But I also did before that, I took a course at Harvard Business School in disruptive strategy.
Interesting.
Trying to kind of think about, well, how do you innovate as a regulatory person, right? How do you be a good business partner? So that's kind of the background around that. And then lastly, as intro, I would say, what's really inspired me, I think, in the last several years is understanding this value of a community, of an innovation community, right? And, we all talk about, well, how do you have a startup mindset? How do you have a growth mindset? Well, you got to get out of yourself.
Absolutely.
right? And get out of your environment, go talk to people, engage with people. So some examples of communities, and I'm happy to talk to anyone if they're interested in kind of other experiences and sharing.
Yeah.
But DIME, like the Digital Medicine Society, absolutely amazing that they're doing, and they have individual memberships. Innovators with an 8, the letter 8.
Oh, nice.
Is really amazing, and a different type of platform. There's Health Excel, which I just joined last year, again as an individual, and that has really gotten so much engagement in discussions on the different types of innovations. It's really makes you think. So these communities give you an opportunity to kind of test concepts, to hear what others are having problems with, you know, and it could even lead to collaborations. And so that's where I think that what the innovation community enables is kind of torture testing your thoughts in a way that you would be, you know, confidential about. You're not going to tell your company projects, right?
Yeah.
But you kind of gain that confidence on how do you talk about innovation and all of these, and then all the courses and stuff kind of gives you all a thought about, which we might talk about later. And so there are so many connection points available to really help you to follow your passion. And I think it's just an amazing time to be in healthcare and really kind of bring forward the next curve of value-based care.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, already, I just want to write down all the names of the groups that you had mentioned. I really, you know, love this kind of idea around community and collaboration to continue to drive things forward. And you had also mentioned something about, you know, about regulatory affairs and storytelling, which I thought was also so powerful. I think it, you know, that's definitely a connection that I hadn't made before, but I think makes a lot of sense when you really put it in that context. You have such an illustrious career. It's pretty amazing. And so kind of with this, you know, diverse career experience, what kind of drew you to the health tech space specifically? I know you mentioned some of the certification programs that you went to. Were there any other things that kind of drew you to this space?
Yeah, I gave it it's something that was a pivotal moment actually, and somewhat serendipitous and somewhat planned, right? So sometimes this is one of those stories where, you know, the universe speaks to you and things line up. So, you know, as part of my roles at GSK and regulatory affairs, of course, we were always innovating, but as I understood from the disruptive strategy course that I took with Clayton Christensen, which was, okay, that's core innovation. Most of it was core innovation, right? Which is absolutely important. You don't want to go away from that. But in 2017, I had a much different role, and that was all innovation. So I no longer at that time looked at existing products, but it was all new things. So emerging science innovation, differentiated or disruptive innovation. So I started to think to myself, well, how am I going to understand this? And how am I going to frame strategies when maybe it's not written in a regulatory guidance, right? There's no other precedent. So how do you kind of figure out that strategy? So that's why I started taking these courses, but that's why we started looking at, okay, you know what? Digital health, medical technology, convergence of technologies, these with drug therapies, for example, or standalone, these are also important, valuable innovations, because if you look at, well, where is healthcare trending? It's trending towards value-based care. We hope we get there, right? But what's going to inform value-based care? It's going to be those everyday healthcare aspects. So absolutely. You know, I attended, what really inspired me was I attended a MedTech conference in 2018, and where I met leaders and you know, they were talking about, well, what's the future? The future was making the patient a better patient was talked about. I thought, wow, okay, my mind was just blown with all of these new concepts. And so I thought, okay, well, that's self-care, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How we can redefine healthcare.
Right.
And healthcare is a big business, and healthcare actually is self-care. So
I
these are
love that.
kind of how I started to, for myself, kind of connect the dots and really think, okay, technology is important, but it's not the tech itself. It's not the gimmick, you know, it's not the fad. It's what is the outcome that you get from these digital or med tech tools, right? What is it driving?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what really kind of got me into this space.
That's incredible. And I think even what you said too about not just the tech, but the, you know, what is the purpose behind the tech, I think is such a great guidepost for innovators everywhere to really, you know, ask themselves those questions as they continue to move forward. So I think that is incredible. You know, you are really at this amazing kind of crux between the innovation and the regulatory affairs, and have been able to really, you know, lend your expertise to both sides. How has being in regulatory affairs impacted your perspective of health innovation? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, you know, from my perspective, I think, you know, regulatory affairs, they're your business partners, right? It's not a service function.
Right.
It's not on a need to know basis that you go, oh, regulatory, is this in the rule book, or can I do it? Can I not do it? It's really part of development, right? And so that's kind of how I think about it. So I love to engage early, and starting with that innovation role I got into, that exclusive innovation role, that was what I was doing. So then it became, okay, this is what you've got to do. You've got to engage really early and be part of that development, that discussion. And then the courses I took, including the Columbia business courses, you know, I mentioned, and disruptive strategy course I took. I also took, you know, a course with Professor Rita McGrath on leading strategic growth and change, which was just amazing. So as a regulatory person, I need to understand, what is the business landscape? What is the healthcare landscape? So I can help to kind of tell that story. And so oftentimes I think, you know, people will come and say, oh, well, does this require submission? Or is this a medical device? Is it a drug? Is it a wellness app? Do I have to submit? You know, all these sort of things. And I kind of think, well, instead of asking those questions being first, we're going to focus on, what is the outcome you're actually trying to look for? What are you driving for? What problem are you trying to solve? And I think from a regulatory perspective, to go back to your question, that is, I think, what's fundamental is you want to frame that to the regulators so that if it requires submission, and oftentimes, you know, meaningful and important innovations will require, you know, some level of regulatory approval in the US or other markets. And so understanding how to frame that is absolutely critical, so you can tell clearly. Now, often you put yourself in the regulator role, and you're receiving a dossier. You know, I hear some reviewers will, you know, have stated in other forums that, well, it's not clear. I don't understand what this is. In kind of general forums. And so it's absolutely critical to tell that story clearly, as simply as possible, but with focusing on the important points. So that the value is not lost, and also you're addressing all of the critical points that a regulator is looking for.
Absolutely. And once again, I mean, I really love how you're making those connection points to storytelling, to making, you know, really highlighting the impact and the outcome behind these types of tools. And really, you had mentioned something about, you know, the idea of bringing in regulators or advisors within the regulatory space kind of early on, maybe even in the ideation part of the business. Do you have any other like advice or things that founders of startups should be aware, kind of from a regulatory standpoint?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were discussing just a minute ago is focus on the problem you're trying to solve. And do you have a solution to that problem? Do people care if that problem is solved, right? I mean, it might be great, but does anyone care?
Right, absolutely.
Will users engage with it? Is it simple to use? Is it easy to use? And then I think the other thing to really think about is how is that going to interact with the healthcare journey in terms of how a user, meaning consumer or patient, is going to interact with it. At what point do they use it? What action is the user, being patient or consumer, having to take, right?
Right.
And how important all those actions to lead to the health outcome that you're actually looking for. This all helps you kind of to figure out, well, what's the evidence that you need to build?
Right.
And that will help you go back to tell the story. So I think the important aspect is, what problem are you trying to solve, and will this solve it? And what health outcome is this leading to that will help you find, I think the evidence. But I think also when you think about, the aspect of, human health, right? And kind of longevity of an innovation. So I kind of think about, in the book Anti-Fragile, the concept of the Lindy effect was popularized, I think. And how I understand it is, it talks about, something that has longevity, that has been around for a long time, most likely predictively may continue to have value, right? And so if you're looking at an innovation and, well, what outcome are you trying to drive? What need, or what human need you're kind of fulfilling? For example, if you help somebody with osteoarthritis and it makes them more mobile, right? I mean, that to me is a human need, right? It helps someone's quality of life and help them kind of live well and live to their fullest potential.
Absolutely.
And how that delivers is really important. So I think, looking at the jobs to be done, in connection with what problem are you trying to solve, and then predicting, if it's possible, is kind of concept I'm thinking of, is that Lindy effect.
Right.
Can you predict the longevity of this innovation? But oftentimes you're going to have to understand that innovation is iterative. It might not be best first time. Right. But if you're trying to deliver an important need, maybe best isn't the most important thing in that moment in time. Actually, delivering is what's important.
Right.
But then you always have to make it better and be ahead of the innovation curve to keep making it valuable. Right. Not just from a business aspect, but also from what patients and consumers are needing.
Absolutely. I think, the way you just described this roadmap, I think, I was going to ask you to put on your innovator hat, but you already did that. So I think that's incredible, really being able to play that lens as well. And I wanted to ask you, how you frame your next opportunity as an innovator. And I think you already gave such a great roadmap, really thinking about things like sustainability, quality of life, the value. Is there anything else that you would want to add in terms of how do you frame opportunities, kind of putting on your innovator hat?
Yeah, I think it's kind of looking at, well, what's the ultimate outcome we're looking for? Is value-based care, right? I think that's where most innovators are trying to bring forward, and that's going to come forward with information, with tools. So I'll also say, from a regulatory standpoint, innovation shapes regulations. So don't be afraid if regulations don't currently exist, right? Get in there and have conversations, but understand what problem you're trying to solve, what you're trying to have a proposal. And I think, these are things that I would keep in mind
Yeah.
having that innovator's hat on. And I'm also really excited next week, actually, I'll be part of the HITLAB cohort for Breakthrough One. And part of this is really to help me, at least my personal goal is
Yeah.
to kind of help to understand how to pitch ideas better.
Mm.
And so again,
Cool.
I think synergizing that regulatory affairs with innovation and being a good business partner. I'm
Right.
so excited about these programs. And if anyone is interested to hear further about any of the programs I mentioned, I'm happy to share.
Awesome. Yeah, that I think would be really great for anyone that is interested in any of the HITLAB programs or some of the other programs that Zina mentioned. I think it's absolutely amazing that you have this mindset of always learning, always being curious. I think that's such an important, skill set, character trait to have, and I am just inspired by it. So, and I'm sure so many other folks in the audience will be asking for those book recommendations. I got some community recommendations out of it, which is incredible.
Yeah,
I also wanted.
I think it's
such
an exciting time to be in healthcare, right? And innovating, and so many opportunities to try things, so many opportunities for collaboration. And I think that's the other thing, when you're collaborating, kind of really think about, well, what are you trying to get out of the collaboration? What are you good at? What is your potential partner going to be good at? Kind of looking at that kind of holistically going forward.
Yeah, that's incredible. And kind of, lending to all of your, the amazing visibility that you've probably been able to have with all of these community, forums that you've been a part of, but also just your own experience. What, in your opinion, what direction do you see health tech space going? Are there any trends that have kind of caught your eye?
Yeah, I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying before about that human experience, right? And I think looking at how patients are not just treating disease, right? You get a pill and how are patients and consumers, how are they experiencing the disease on a daily basis? How are they experiencing treatment on a daily basis? How are they experiencing healthcare on a daily basis? For example, a diabetic, right? Experience with testing the sugar, taking the insulin, having checkups, how that whole experience, right? I think is an example. And I think more and more there's going to be focus on that kind of real self-care experiential aspect. I think it's going to be so important. And I do believe those will help to inform leading towards a value-based healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I 100% agree. And then final question from me before we get into some questions from the audience. What general advice do you have for maybe the folks on this call that are entrepreneurs or kind of within the health tech space? Do you have any general advice or maybe advice that you got that has been really helpful for you kind of on your career journey?
I think something that I really learned from this innovation community, experience was sometimes I used to get frustrated, and think, well, is it me or what's happening here? But what the innovation community helped me understand is no, others are actually experiencing the same thing, right? And so, okay, don't take it personally, kind of look at, okay, what are you trying to drive? Again, going back to that innovation story and what outcome are you trying to drive, focusing on that. I think the advice is that stay resilient. If you really believe in the problem you're trying to solve and having, keeping fidelity to that, I think is then understanding that that's important, but being able to roll with the punches and understanding it's going to be iterative, having that resilience to do that, I think is, don't be discouraged is kind of what I'm trying to say, keep trying.
No, I think that's incredible. Very, very good advice. I think what you had mentioned about just knowing that there's other people that are kind of going through this with you, that you're not alone, I think already, can be so very inspiring and sometimes very supporting too, to kind of know that.
Yeah,
awesome.
And I think what that helps is, bringing the outside in, the inside out, I think it really helps to make it better, right?
Right.
Ultimately, I think, again, if you're focusing on the outcome and the patient user experience, where can you go wrong? Because I remember someone also said in the innovation community, I don't always win, but I never fail. And then I found that so
love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And then Yoda says, right? Yoda says, do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah.
So if you keep pontificating and you're not actually doing something, you're not learning anything. So you miss 100% of the swings you don't take, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's so, I love that that quote that you heard from that forum. I think that is incredible. All right, awesome. Let's see. So we got some great questions. I'll just kind of start from the top. So we had a question around, within kind of the women's health space, there can be a little bit of an education gap or just a lack of information from those that are, the experts that have been doing this work to maybe others that they're trying to communicate to that just aren't as knowledgeable. So the question is, how would you go about approaching and educating stakeholders such as investors kind of on the why, maybe if, they are not personally experiencing it, as an example?
That's a great question. And I think, one of the courses at Columbia, what I learned about was, the Livongo story. And what was part of that story was, talking to investors, talking to analysts, having other startups have talked about, virtual reality and surgery. Well, how do you get adoption? Well, you actually get the surgeons to come and experience that that technology, and then think, oh, wow, this is great. Now, can you improve it this way? Can you do it that way? So I think part of this education is not just slide decks, it's actually experiencing. And I think the Livongo story talks about, how to frame the innovation in a way of, well, it's going to save this much time in the healthcare system. It's going to optimize healthcare in these ways. So employers should adopt these tools because it's only going to lead to a benefit in so many ways. But ultimately, it's also going to help what was defined as the health consumer.
Right. Absolutely. I loved how you mentioned two things that I think is awesome. Just this idea of just tactile use as well, like get your hands on it, kind of take it outside of a slide deck, and then also really just tying it back to the relevance of this particular person or group and how it directly relates to them. I think that's incredible. I know that we are at time, but what I'm going to do is there's a bunch of amazing questions for Zina. So we're just going to send those to her directly so that she can then reach out to you via LinkedIn or email, etc. And then so that you can get those answered. And with that, I would like to say one huge shout out to an amazing guest today, Zina. I thought, it was such an enlightening conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you so much, Nina. It was a lot of fun and really appreciate the opportunity, and happy to chat with anyone.
Love it. Wonderful. Well, next week we have a guest, Dr. Deepa Gupta, for our next episode of Women's Health Tech Wednesday. So please be sure to check that out. And then would like to give one huge shout out again to Zina for just sharing her insight. And definitely, if you get a chance, please check out the podcast and books that she mentioned. I know I'm definitely going to. Love it. And also thank you to our sponsors, Goodwin and Witham, for this amazing conversation. And thank you to you all. Hope you have a great rest of the day and see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.